Just about a month from now, I think it's July 11th, is the date. It's a brand new Superman movie being released. And it has everything that we've come to expect from these, blockbuster, big-budget superhero movies. It's got huge special effects, got a lot of explosions. You have to have explosions in superhero movies, evidently. Always you need to have a plot where the world is just about to be destroyed, and only the superhero is capable of saving it. I was, growing up, never much of a Superman fan. I was a comic book collector, but Superman was never, I was always more like of a Batman guy. But of course I knew about Superman. I mean, everybody knows about Superman. How could you not know about Superman? I know, for example, that his girlfriend's name was, okay, good, Lois Lane, the arch villain who is always fighting against Lex Luthor. That's good. Not everybody would know that. I knew where he worked, Superman. The Daily Planet. Okay, very good. And I knew what planet he originally came from. Krypton. Thank you, Art. And of course, I knew, and it seems like, I guess, probably you do as well, that his alter ego was Clark Kent. Okay. And I always thought it was interesting, the contrast between Clark Kent on the one hand and Superman on the other. If you think about it, Batman and Bruce Wayne, they're like kind of the same guy. They're moody and brooding, a little bit angry, kind of loners keep to them. But Clark Kent and Superman, polar opposites, completely polar opposites. Superman's all the muscles, right? In fact, is understood as being the strongest individual in the entire world by far. Clark Kent was like kind of weak and bumbling. Superman's handsome and chiseled features and the sweeping dark hair, all of that, that kind of classic look. Clark Kent, he was a little schlumpy, he's a little nebbishy. Clark Kent, if you'll excuse the expression, most of the time he wore a hat, and also, of course, the telltale glasses that Clark Kent wore all of the time. And then there was their approach to problem solving as well, also very different. Superman, especially the early Superman, was act first, think later. So you smash it all down, and then you kind of sift through the rubble and see what you have left. But Clark Kent was a man of the mind. He was a newspaper reporter. He was a man of words. He had to use his intellect. He could never show that he had that strength. So he had to use exclusively his intellect whenever he had a problem to solve. For Superman, it was about brawn, not brains. For Clark Kent, exactly the opposite. It was about brains and not brawn. And it's interesting that in the more recent Superman movies, and from the previews, as far as I can tell, this Superman movie as well, the one coming out next month, they actually tried to a certain extent, de-emphasize Superman's superpowers, his physical powers. There are various mechanisms that they use in the course of the recent films to make him physically vulnerable, which he never would have been kind of back in the day. But in doing that, also interestingly, they emphasize the Clark Kent that lies at Superman's core. That Clark Kent, the human emotions, like his love for Lois Lane, I think, is an example of that, and the morals and the ethics. How much power is too much power? How much power is too much power? When does the use of power cross a line? Those are all themes that come up in the more recent Superman movies. When is it better to think your way through a problem instead of blasting your way through a wall? I learned much later in my life that there are some people who trace the superhero genre all the way back to the Bible, to the Hebrew Bible. This morning in the Torah portion, we read the rules about the Nazirite. A person in ancient times, I said a few moments ago, would take a vow not to consume a wine or grape products or cut their hair. And then in the Haftarah that Josh just chanted so beautifully, in that Haftarah, we hear the narrative of the birth of the most famous Nazirite, as I said, of all time, and that is Samson, of Samson and Delilah fame. The story of Samson is one of those stories from the Bible for whatever reason, and I'm always puzzled why this is, but everybody knows the story of Samson. It's just one of those sort of cross-cultural common stories. Everybody knows it. He becomes the great hero, superhero, if you will, of ancient Israel. He leads the Israelites into battle against the Philistines, and although he can't fly and he doesn't have X-ray vision, which of course Superman does, he does have superhuman strength, Samson. And of course, how does he lose that strength? Remember the story? Yeah, once his hair is cut, he loses his strength. Delilah tricks him into cutting his hair. It's pretty clear when you think of it in this context that Samson's story really does read like a superhero story. And if Samson was a superhero type figure, I'd have to put him in the Superman category. No Clark Kent, Samson. He's no Clark Kent. He is not one to pause and to work things out in his head. That is not his style. Instead, he's charge ahead, use the super strength to carry the day, overpower everyone, tidy up, and then head home. It's what he does in every story about him in the Bible, and there are a series of chapters that talk about Samson's life and his adventures, and by and large it works pretty well for him, and it also works pretty well for ancient Israel until the end, when of course Delilah does trick him, he loses his hair, and he is captured and ultimately dies. But you don't have to go far under the surface of Samson to see that he was a flawed figure. I would argue deeply flawed, despite the super strength and the heroism. Unfaithful husband, he consorts with prostitutes, ultimately falls for Delilah. She's a foreign spy. That's often a lost part of the story. He has clearly anger control issues. He's self-centered in many ways, and his way of problem solving is resorting to violence. That's the only way he can do it, the only way he can think about it. You might almost say that Samson is a failed experiment in the Bible. In many ways, he's unique. In many ways, unique, because the other heroes of the Hebrew Bible use strength of spirit or strength of intellect to lead the Jewish people. Samson is the one, however, who tries to do it by physical strength alone, and despite the super strength, in the end, it doesn't work. And it's interesting to note that after Samson dies, the next leader of the Jewish people is the prophet Samuel, person who is a giant in terms of his spiritual life and his intellect, but is no physical strength at all. And that leads me, by the way, for a moment to think about the ritual of bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah as well. That's a coming-of-age ritual in Judaism, bar mitzvah. We know it well. Many Shabbatot, we have the opportunity to be together to celebrate a young man or woman coming of age in our tradition. So we take that ritual for granted today. But if you think about it, and think about coming-of-age rituals in other societies, and when you start to do that, a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah is kind of a strange coming-of-age ritual. In the ancient world, most coming-of-age rituals were based on physical strength and also survival skills. Young men would be asked to go out on their first hunt, right? Go into the wilderness, survive for a period of time, kill the animal, and bring it back into the community. That was a classic coming-of-age ritual in the ancient world. Those were not things necessarily that involved the mind. I mean, to an extent, they did involve the mind, but a lot of it was physical strength and physical ability. That was more important than intelligence in those rituals. The Jewish ritual flips this completely on its head. You don't have to be strong, you don't have to be tall, you don't have to be fast, you don't have to be coordinated to have a bar mitzvah. Josh happens to be all those things, actually, and he's having his bar mitzvah, but you don't have to be. What you do have to be is smart. You have to be smart. It's a ritual that is based on your mind. It's based on what you can learn. It's based on your intellect, what you can understand, what you can absorb by reading. Imagine that the Jews created a coming-of-age ritual based on reading, Only the Jews would do that. What other culture would think of it? And I suspect that one of the reasons this was developed over time was that throughout much of Jewish history, Jews did not control their own physical destinies. The lands that they lived in often were controlled by others physically. Often they had no power, so they focused on the power of the mind and the power of the spirit. because that is something another person ultimately can never control. We all know the verse from the prophet Zechariah. We associate it commonly with Hanukkah. Lo v'chayu v'lo b'koach ki im beruchi amar Adonai Tzivaot. Not, you know it in English probably, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. And in the ancient world, in many ways, that was a unique idea. And that also was the idea that enabled the Jews, when they came here to these shores, here in the United States, to build better lives for themselves and for their families. It was through education. What did every Jewish family that came from Eastern Europe want for their children? Not that they should play professional baseball. That was not the goal. No, they wanted them to do well in school, hopefully go to college, and through that process of growing their minds and becoming educated, getting a good job so they could support themselves and support their families. And that story, in one way or another, has played out over and over again in the Jewish community here in the States. I'm sure there are many people sitting here in the Berman Rubin Sanctuary today who could probably tell that story through their own families. And that, I think, is a good lesson for us to hold on to. I worry sometimes we forget about it. You know, the worldwide population today, it's approaching 7 billion people. 7 billion people in the world. And how many Jews are there in the world? Anybody know? Let's call it 15 million. Who said that? Jay, did you say that? Let's call it 15 million. 15 million. So that becomes about 0.2%. 0.2% of the worldwide population. With numbers like that, you have to remember that it's not going to be physical strength or power that enables us as Jews to make a lasting impact on the world. At the end of the day, even if you're Samson, physical strength is limited. But the power of the mind can be infinite. And there's no limit to what can be learned. There's no limit to what can be understood. There's no limit to what can be imagined. There's no limit to what can be explored in the human mind. And it's that idea, probably more than any other, that has defined Jews and in many ways Judaism for thousands of years, and God willing should continue to guide us in the years to come. Shabbat shalom.
Shalom. Oh, yeah.